Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this interesting webinar that we have brought to you on behalf of OP Jindal Global University. We are a leading social science research-based liberal arts institution located in Delhi, NCR, India. This is your host for today, Ankur Vohra, the head of outreach and international admissions. It's my immense honor and privilege to host a distinguished set of panelists from across India and abroad for a what promises to be a very interesting discussion on the recently released national education policy. I am very happy to have such diverse and such qualified panel to be speaking about this great initiative. I will say a very interesting initiative that the government of India has brought in to reform the education sector after 34 years. It is after 1986 that the country is going to have its first education policy. I have a few slides that I prepared for this webinar. I would like to share those with you and set the context of this discussion. Give me a second. So, for me, NEP 2020 definitely, on reading it comprehensively, I found it to be an aspirational, visionary, transformational document, and somebody who has been associated with higher education sector and talking to school leaders, school teachers, students and parents for last many years, doing counseling for my university. I have seen that the reforms that the document envisions for the education sector are much needed, and they are the step in the right direction. I think India for a very long time was looking forward to such kind of a visionary document to come in to the country. If it may not be the perfect document or the solution to all our problems, but at least it's the step in the right direction, as I say. The National Education Policy 2020 envisions, these are the fundamental principles of NEP 2020 that has been envisioned by our Ministry of HRD, Government of India. Give me a second. I'll just want to mute my panelists because there is a lot of disturbance coming. Please, if you can mute yourself, if you are not self-muted, because there is a lot of disturbance. Okay, so the NEP 2020 envisions no hard separations between arts and sciences. Now, gone are the days when we had to ask our students to pick one over the other, and the crucial decision that we had in grade 10 of picking either non-medical or medical or commerce or arts as the options, and the students who were presumably the best students in the class were auto selected for medical and engineering. The rest of them had to choose between commerce and arts in that order. So gone are the dates for that. The government of India says that it's very important that we have interdisciplinary education for all our students. The thrust of that policy now is on recognizing, identifying, and fostering the unique capabilities of each student, which we have been saying for so long. The unrealistic cutoffs that we have for some of our public institutions going up to 98 and 99 percentile, wherein even after student getting 95% believes that he or she is not doing justice to her potential or his potential. I hope with this policy change, those days may be over soon. The focus is on now regular formative assessment for learning, and to do away with what is just like endemic in our society now, the coaching culture, with students going to schools and spending even more amount of time in tuition centers, coaching centers, and there have been a lot of reports on the coaching culture in our country. There have been cities that have been dubbed as the coaching cities, coaching center cities, where students from all over India go for preparation of higher education entrance examinations. The report wants us to do, the policy statement wants us to get away from that coaching culture and focus on the real love for education. I really hope that happens for us. As I mentioned, the multidisciplinary and holistic education across sciences, social sciences, arts, humanities is the need of the hour, as the government of India emphasizes. Emphasis is on conceptual understanding rather than rote learning and learning for exams. Creativity and critical thinking to encourage logical decision making and innovations. Ethics and human and constitutional values like empathy, respect for others, cleanliness, courtesy, and whole lot of other things that we take for granted, and that should be part of any educated person's profile. But unfortunately, as we have seen over the years, It doesn't mean if somebody has went to college is also ethical or has those moral things that are necessary for us to be called complete personality. So the report, the policy document emphasizes on developing those aspects of human personality as well. According to the highest priority to, again, another aspect, another pain point of our education system has been the foundation literacy and numeracy for all our students by grade 3. As we know, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan and those kind of positive policy changes that have brought students to school in large numbers over the last many years, but that is not leading to real education. Over and over reports have been telling us that our students' foundation literacy and numeracy is far behind other countries in the world. So the quality of education and making sure that every child in the classroom is learning and is able to compete with students from other countries, from globally, should be improved. Full equity and inclusion as the cornerstone of all education decisions. The government wants people from all strata of society to have access to quality education, promoting multilingualism and the power of language. Another very important aspect of NEP has been its focus on teaching in the regional language, or what we call as mother tongue till grade 5. That's an important aspect that I found really interesting. The schools will be encouraged to teach in mother tongue of the student till grade 5. Life skills such as communication, cooperation, teamwork, and resilience will be taught in the schools. And another important part of NEP is the emphasis on teachers and faculty at the heart of the learning process. Their recruitment, continuous professional development, positive working environment, and service conditions have been talked about in detail in the NEP. The continuous review of progress based on sustained research and regular assessment by educational experts. Education is a public service. Access to quality education must be considered a basic right of every child. So if you see over and over again, the document talks about the access to quality education, equity for education, and that is something that is very promising and interesting for me and encouraging for me also. The NEP envisions the investment in the education sector in India to be doubled to 6% of the GDP. As of now, our country spends about 4.5%. The document is encouraging Government of India, requests Government of India, and it has been accepted to increase the investment in education sector to 6% and increase the gross enrollment ratio of our student, which is called GER, from 26% now to almost 50%. The vision of the policy is to instill among the learners a deep-rooted pride in being Indian. That was another aspect that came across very strongly when I was reading this document, that there is a lot of emphasis on thought, on the Indian thought, on the Indian intellect, spirit, and deeds. So that's about the policy part. Now, coming to the school education, I think one of the biggest reform that NEP envisions for the school education, and that has been talked about quite much in our media as well, is the change of school education structure from 10+2 format. Thus, the education structure will be restructured to 5+3+3+4 format, with the emphasis on early childhood care and education, wherein students from the age of 3 to 6, which were earlier ignored or not focused on, will be now brought into what we call as foundational level of education. There have been numerous research on this topic which says that a lot of human development, the life and the learning of a child depends on what happens in the age 0 to 6. The Government of India is trying to, and this is a welcome move, trying to emphasize an early foundation education for all our students. Another aspect that school education part of the report talks about is curtailing dropout rates and ensuring universal access to education at all levels. This is another pain area for our education sector for last so many years, wherein we have seen large number of students dropping out after grade 8, after grade 10, 12, and very few people actually make it to universities and colleges. So that is an interesting aspect that I thought should be discussed in the discussion today that we are having with the panel. On higher education sector, there is a continued emphasis on moving towards a higher education system based on multidisciplinary universities, large multidisciplinary universities and colleges, and with at least setting up of a large multidisciplinary university in every district. And the aspiration is to have every district in India having a multidisciplinary university, which again is a step in the right direction. Faculty and institutional autonomy, which is again has been a subject of debate for our country for last so many years. They want to give more faculty and institutional autonomy to our institutions. There is a talk of revamping the curriculum, pedagogy, assessment for student support and student experiences, reaffirming the integrity of faculty and institutional leadership, establishment of a national research foundation. Now, another pain point that we have been talking over and over again is the amount of research that happens in Indian universities is not at par with what happens in other global institutions in more developed countries. So the government of India, recognizing that, has recommended establishment of a national research foundation to fund outstanding peer-reviewed research and to actively seed research in universities and colleges. Governance of higher education institutions by highly qualified independent boards having academic and administrative autonomy, again a part of having top quality higher education administration for our institutions. Another major reform that has been brought in is the light but by a single regulator for higher education, and the report talks in detail of setting up of four as we might say regulatory authorities, and that is very interesting, and increasing access, equity and inclusion for our students across higher education institutions, encouraging private philanthropic universities for disadvantaged and underprivileged students to be set up, online education and open distance learning, and all infrastructure and learning materials accessible and available to learners with disabilities. So that's about my context, and having done my research on this report, I am very happy to state that as a professional of higher education sector, I'm very happy with the direction that we are moving in. Now I would like to hand over to my panelists for their views and on this NEP. My first speaker for today is Mr. Sameer Arora, who is the Vice Principal for Legacy School in Bangalore. Before I hand it over to Sameer, I'd like to introduce him. Sameer is a natural leader, a collaborator, and an educator with over 24 years of experience in schools. His experience is not limited to teaching across all levels of schools. He has integrated pedagogical innovations in curriculum, fostering partnerships with educational organizations, individuals, experts, and members of the community. His journey has spanned cities, schools, and educational enterprises and organizations. He has prior experience of establishing 2 travel-based startups offering experiential education programs to the youth. Sameer has traveled to over 20 countries. He firmly believes in the best form of education. He has also worked with National Geographic for one of their education programs. He has volunteered with many organizations and has been awarded for his distinguished services to Asian Regional Space Recruitment Design Competition and Duke of Edinburgh Award. He has also been awarded the Class Noble Educator of Distinction for excellence in teaching and encouragement of and dedication to academic success of students by National Society of High School Scholars in USA. He is also an accomplished career counselor along with being a vice principal. It's an honor to have you, Sameer, here with us. If you can share your points on the national education policy.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Ankur. Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for putting up this panel together. And just a small disclaimer before I begin. I think NEP is a document in progress for me in reading. So I'm still continuing to read it and decipher it section by section, and all my understanding and certain conclusions I've withdrawn from the document is coming from my conversation with my friends, colleagues, and experts in education fraternity. And I think Ankur has set up the ground for NEP being an inspirational, well thought through. And I was looking at, there is a feedback from almost 2 lakh people integrated across India, right to grassroots level. So it's a very democratically developed policy document, which is very rightly focusing on universal access to quality education with an objective of India becoming the knowledge hub of the world. So I think as an educator, there are 4 or 5 points which are very key and critical to me, which attracted my attention. So I think I'm just going to touch base on those points and leave you all for you all to ponder upon and my colleagues to comment on. I think one of the first and the foremost, points which really was very interesting for me to see that there is a formalization and recognition of importance of early years education. And today we are not talking about 6 to 14, we are talking about 3 to 18. So that means we've gone backward and integrated pre-primary education, and we've gone forward and realized that secondary education is as important. So I think I work in legacy school, and the foundation of legacy school has been Montessori education system, which believes in a lot of experiential method and child being the teacher himself and teacher being just scaffolding the child in his learning journey. And we always talk about that the study which says the maximum brain development in a person's life happened between age 0 to 6. So now our education system has excluded the 3 to 6 years of age in previous policies. There was not much focus. So this is a very interesting development for me, because I believe if there are positive inputs in a child from age 3 to 6, the early brain development will have a lasting impact on child's ability to learn and succeed in school and life. So that's very interesting for me. And I think what they've gone further a step forward to decide, to basically say that how should this education be conducted. And in terms of recommending it to be a child-centered approach with focus on informal, flexible, multiple play-based activity approach, and focusing totally on socio-emotional development. And the assessments have been kept through observations, which is good, because otherwise as a nation, we are very obsessed with assessments and tests. So they've kept it out of that purview of the early education sector. So it's a very progressive move. And I think these all factors would go a long way in strengthening the foundational literacy and numeracy of the young learners, which is what the gap is in our country primarily. I mean, in 70 years of independence, there was an interesting report by Pratham I was reading. In 70 years of our education, we've not been able to achieve a very simple target. Every single child in school has the foundational literacy and numeracy skills. So that's interesting. And now it also brings me to a point of wonderment where I say the cost of doing so, how will it be met? Of course, we said that 4.3 to 6% the budgetary allocation, and there has been a conversation, education has never been the central government priority, and that is why there is a very little allocation of, budgets. But I think coming from a business teacher background, I always ask the question, we are Henry Ford's principle of management always say efficiency of your resources. Teach your resources as scarce resources. That's what we teach in management constantly. So my question is, all these years with the amount of inputs which have gone in. Now, if you look at last 20, 25 years, development of new and existing schools, some schools even have just 10 children. Cost of running that school is 80 to 90,000 rupees per month. Are the outputs incommensurate to the inputs which have gone? We're talking about the midday meal schemes. We're talking about teacher training, which are happening in very silos. There is no comprehensive teacher training development program, but there are annual holiday-based training programs which teachers may not be themselves interested in. We spent a huge amount of money, and we miserably failed to bring in desired learning outcomes, though our gross enrollment ratio has gone up. So I think I'm very interested to see how this policy will move us to the area of accountability, where we will not see. There are two ways to measure how well have you done as a government, as a bureaucrat, whether to look at your inputs or to look at your outputs. So very conveniently, as nation, our focus has been on inputs. How much have I spent? I've never gone back to see how much that expenditure has brought a change in the learning outcome of the children. So I'm very interested to see how does that happen. I think the second debate which is happening particularly, I don't have a right to talk about it much, but I belong to like an advantaged community which works in an international school. But I think introduction of regional language as a language of instruction till grade 5, or if possible till grade wherever possible, is a key word. It's a very interesting conversation. And trust me, we have family friends, some of them in Hyderabad, some of them in Pune, who pulled out their children from schools and they're teaching the children in vernacular language. And these are people who are well qualified professional people. And I'm sure they've gone by study. So according to me, this is a progressive move, though not novel, because you see the countries like China, Russia, European countries are already doing it. So NEP is making it clear that there is not any forced learning here. Everything would be optional. I think so that's a misconception, and I hope it stays that way and government doesn't make it mandatory. The policy, again, I'm reiterating the fact, uses the word wherever possible. hope that doesn't lead us into legislation, which will bring in another plethora of problems we were discussing. It also gives parents and schools the power to choose the medium of instruction. The policy clause is directional in nature, according to me, and not mandatory, if I'm reading it correct. And I think for the parents who want their children to learn in the mother tongue or regional language will have to make the choice, and that's perfectly fine. However, the extension of three-language formula is something which I struggle with, and I still need discussion. I'm not very convinced with the idea of three-language formula, because eventually I see that there is certain form of promotion of one language over the other. And my understanding is between English and the regional language, one will become the first and medium of instruction, first language and the medium of instruction, and the second can be studied at an advanced level. Now, worry comes with the third language, especially if you're in a highly mobile job, particularly armed forces, bank officers, even in private sector today, the mobility is so high. So what is your option of third language, which you can take up across the country? It either ends up becoming Hindi or Sanskrit. You may not even end up studying your mother tongue as a language. If I'm a Punjabi, I don't think any school in Bangalore is going to offer me Punjabi or Gujarati. My friend Pavak is Gujarati, is going to offer Gujarati here, right? So how do you address that issue? That's another problem. I think the third progressive move which they're talking about is board exam. And I think they brought, at least in policy, the board exam as a low-stake exam. And they said they're going to conduct it twice a year, once for general, and the other cycle would be to improvement. Also, I think I will not dwell deeper on that. And Ankur has already mentioned that there will be more on the skills and more on the competencies than on knowledge. And I think that's very interesting. And again, testing at grade 3, 5, and 8 level to test the assessments are going to be very, very critical. And I think what is important there is, I think Maharashtra already has a model which has been talked about, multiple commissions. But what is the integrity of the data which is generated there, right? Why are we scaring from getting into the PISA ranking? So my question is, it's okay to do the assessment at age 3, 5, and 8, but what will be the integrity of the data which will come out of this, and how do we fix accountability of the organizations which are going to use this data to further improve the learning outcome? And my worry would also be that these assessments end up becoming stay as assessments and don't end up becoming tests, because I think socially and structurally we are very obsessed with the idea of pseudo excellence in terms of marks over skills, and that's my worry. So we need to guard ourselves of seeing these grade 3, 5, and 8 examinations as assessment exams and not as tests. I think higher education is another very interesting field to become a career counselor. Briefly touch upon it. The route of development of vocational skills from grade 6 onwards is a huge shift. But mostly in our country, due to multiple reasons, there has been a social or a structural bias towards, towards vocational education. And I think identifying that bias cannot be removed in grade 11 when you're moving out from, junior high school, graduating from grade 10. Should I do ITI or should I do 11, 12 and go into the college? They pushed that vocational education route to grade 6, and it's an interesting and progressive move. And as a nation, we are very obsessed to push our children through the route of academic degree at under postgraduate level and even sometimes at doctorate level without very, very little employable skills. So I think vocational education introduction early is a win-win situation. And today morning I was reading a news by Google, which is planned to launch only 6-month professional programs in the fraction of cost of college education that will teach candidates how to perform to teach candidates how to perform in demand jobs in high paying and high growth career fields. So you don't need to be a PhD, you don't need to be a master's, you don't need to be an undergraduate degree holder from an elite institution to be in a high paying and high career growth field. You can simply do a Google diploma or certificate and be happy with that. So this is very interesting, and that's the route which will probably push us to start rethinking our vocational education. Also, we set up some extremely ambitious goals of improving our gross enrollment ratio from 26.3% to 50%. That is double. I mean, I'm saying you're looking at a large population, and that's also in quality institutions in a span of 15 years. And is it practical? That is what my question. Again, inviting world-class institutions to open campuses in India as early as it sounds, as easy as it sounds, we will see, and the time will tell how the regulatory mechanism and bureaucracy can allow these institutions to function and thrive effectively. So that's what my worry is. And I think the second paradigm shift here is seeing the success of quality world-class programs and education experiences at a fraction of a cost at new age universities, starting with the Shukla, Flames, Kriya, and OP Jindal in the in the alphabetical order, the word multidisciplinary has found a very strong way in its NAP. And I think of the 5 institutions who are represented here, so I say thank you, gratitude to you, Kala, and thank you to you, Ankur. The institutions like you push government to think that being multidisciplinary is the way to go. And this word is very interesting. And I think this approach is in contrast to the standalone institutions of excellence like IIT, IIMS, and IISc. If they have to thrive, they have to start collaborating more. I started my career as a teacher, a very proud teacher. And all these years, whenever I would go into a class as a career counselor, as a teacher, I would ask, how many of you want to be a teacher? Trust me, in my entire career span of 25 years, I've never seen more than a hand over probably 3 to 4 times in my lifespan where a child said, I want to be a teacher in life. So I think so that's an interesting move by establishing a common guiding set of national professional standards for teachers. That will happen by 2022. And it brings in a joy in me saying that, okay, I'm a professional, I'm a qualified professional now, even though we usually use that word quite often. And in India, I think a lot of credit I would like to go to institutions or movements like Teach for India, Shaheen Mistry, who's been able to bring an aspirational element in the youth, and who've been, and I mean, of course, it has given many offshoots to many organizations which are working in education excellence, advocacy, and probably grassroots level across India. And, Anand national opinion polls have repeatedly shown that teaching in Finland is most admired profession. And primary teaching is the most sought after career. Why it is not in India is a question I still want to ask. And what will NEP do about that? I think so. The policy also lays down the teacher education, which gradually moved to multidisciplinary colleges and universities by 2030. I think universities like Azim Premji are doing already a good job there. And I think effective reorganization of classes in the key stages is not possible right now without building the capacity of teachers. So a huge pool of teachers who are conditioned and trained in a fashion which is not in alignment with the NEP. What is the government plan? I don't see that as very clearly enumerated in NEP. What is the plan for the existing teachers? The future teacher education is very clear, but what is happening going to be with this last pool of teachers who are undertrained or not trained at all with the philosophy we are going to follow? And I'm going to leave with 3 questions after this talk. I think the first question is, there are 3 keys to successful education system. The first is access. Are there enough schools? Are there enough schools across the country? That's one key question. Is there an equity? Equity in terms of gender equity, demographic equity, socioeconomic equity. Is education addressing that equity issue? The third is quality. Upgraded infrastructure plus human capital training, off and on training is not equal to quality. I mean, if you look at expenditure which has been done on developing new schools, upgrading infrastructure and learning outcomes being, if not better, or if not lower than being the same, it is not equivalent to the quality. So what is that we are going to address this as? The second is, can we only focus achieving a very basic objective and not being very aspirational? In next 5 years in our schools, every single child is able to achieve foundational literacy and numeracy skills. Can we as a nation just focus on this one thing? That's very, very clear. And I think rest everything will happen. Right now, across grades, children are learning to reading to learn, learning to read. They constantly go to school to learn to read. Can we move it from reading to learn? That means they have foundational literacy skills, and whatever they read, that leads them to the learning. And a third thing is, how do architect center-state relationship provide more autonomy to state, and how well they will deliver the achieved goals? So that architecture of state and center relationship, because this being a concurrent subject, is going to be an interesting conversation. And I think that calls for another probably having some education ministers of different states on a panel to discuss about it. And finally, how do we foster a relationship between the 3 key stakeholders who can bring the change? The government, which suffers from execution deficit. Every policy which has come up, we were discussing with Ms. Bose, mentioned about Qatari Commission's recommendations were not very different and they were very interesting. I went back and read and that's right, Ms. Bose. They're very interesting. So if the government is suffering from execution deficit of all good policies and documents coming up but not being executed, how do we address that? Private sector is considered to be the sinner, and it suffers from trust deficit. They are here to make money. Making money is not bad as long as it's made it ethically. And at that, private institutions have already told us how are they bridging the equity gap by charging the ones who can pay and routing that money to the ones who cannot pay by giving them 100% scholarships from need-based scholarships, moving away from merit-based scholarships. And the third is the civil society. That is each one of us in the webinar who suffers from the skill deficit. Each one of us has a brilliant idea to execute. And together in small silos, we've been doing good work. How do we come together as a civil society which suffers from skill deficit, private sector, which from touch deficit, government from execution deficit, to come up with a definitive plan which will help us make NEP a reality, not just a policy document lying in the library or in the BA colleges where we will study it and say what a fantastic document it was and it did get executed. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Samir, for that wonderful and insightful take on NEP. But I was listening to our Honorable Prime Minister's speech on NEP, and he mentioned this, that I don't want this document to be lying in library. I want this document to be implemented, and it's now up to us in the education fraternity and society to take it forward for our generation to come. Thank you so much, Samir. As always, you have been brilliant with your comments and remarks. I will now move on to my next speaker, who is an inspiration. I read about her in a book on how different schools are being run in the country, and her name came up, and I'm very honored to have Ms. Shukla Bose with us today. I'd just like to introduce her. In the year 2003, Shukla Bose started the Parikrma Humanity Foundation, a rooftop school in Rajendra Nagar in Bangalore with 165 students from the slums. Today, with over 4 schools and 1 junior college, Parikrma Humanity Foundation continues to offer high-quality education and support to 1,500 children from over 4 orphanages and over 80 slums in the city. The foundation was awarded the #1 social impact school in India in 2019 to 2020. Ms. Bose is a TED speaker. She has been contributing towards shaping and influencing education policies at the state and national level. Ms. Bose is a member of the Karnataka Knowledge Commission headed by Dr. K. Kasturi Rangan, the man who is the chair for the National Education Policy. She is the Academy member of 100 Organization Finland. She has published 3 papers in international journals and contributes opinion pieces for national dailies on education and policies. She has been nominated as the chairperson to draft the Karnataka School Education Policy and works with Karnataka State Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, IQ Education Excellence Task Force to check on quality in education. A member of the National CIA Education Committee, Ms. Bose helps in drafting the national policy for schools. She is on board for a few private and public sector organizations for prevention of sexual harassment of women at workplace. She was with the Arora Group for over 13 years and was the CEO of RCI for 11 years. She also volunteered with Mother Teresa for 7 years. Her experience with slum and street children greatly encouraged her to make the development of under-reserved children as her mission for life. She has been awarded around the world. Ms. Bose, it's an honor to have you here with us. Please, if you can share your thoughts on the national education policy.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Ankur. Thanks. I think the idea of having this conversation amongst practitioners in education is a great idea, and I congratulate you for organizing this. As you've just mentioned, I have been working with the Karnataka Knowledge Commission, and I chaired the school education policy, the Karnataka school education policy. We created a task force under Dr. Kasturi Rangan. The idea was, how could we and each state create the idea or the vision of what education should be that could actually shape the national policy. And I feel a great sense of, in some ways, ownership of the national education policy. And I feel good when I see some of the, actually most of the recommendations that we made sitting in Vidhan Sauda in Bangalore actually has found space in the national education policy. And yet, it's important for, if we call ourselves experts, I say I'm not really an educator. I've been in the corporate world for 26 years, and I've been in education for a less amount of time. But I feel that it's very important for us to actually analyze and, in fact, do a post-mortem of policies as such. Because someone like me who actually runs schools, and I see Samir as well does that. So we run schools. We know that there is a big gap between theory and practice. I mean, that is our reality. So when we say NEP is a visionary document, it's really path-breaking, all of it is true. But I think it's important for us to also look at all the policies that have been created, drafted in the past. Samir mentioned the Qatari Commission, and really, I think the Qatari Commission is the Bible of all education policies. Drafted in 1964, took 2 years to be made. MC Chagla was the education minister then. B.S. Qatari said that the real spirit of education was for the development of individuals so that they could develop society. And that's, therefore, I feel the foundation of what NEP is took place then. Then the question I have to ask is, why did it not happen all these years? What went wrong? Why did we have to create, then under Rajiv Gandhi, there was another policy, which was kind of an addition to that, but the structure has always been the Qatari Commission. Why is it that we had to have a separate RTE that created so much of angst amongst us? Basically, if all RTE tried to do is to bring in equity in education, and who can deny that in a country like ours, equity and quality hand in hand is the most important thing and the most important ambition of any education structure. So we have to therefore say, how is NEP 2020 in any way different from the Qatari Commission? The first thing, of course, I think is the breakup of the structure. I think I take great pleasure because I know sitting in Vidhan Sauda how we had to cry ourselves hoarse to make people understand how important early education was. That's when the foundation is laid of how a child begins to think, how a child begins to inquire, how the creative forces within the child. And therefore, I'm so happy that the central government has accepted the importance of early childhood education. And so the structure of 5-3-3, I think, is going to be an interesting phenomena that we will see happening, which will actually see to the natural progression and development of a child's mind that will convert information to knowledge and knowledge to wisdom. Okay. The other thing that I feel very happy about the new education policy is that it is a lot more gender sensitive. I haven't heard many people talk about it, but actually a lot of effort has gone in to actually focus on girls' education. And it's not, I mean, one can always, eloquently talk about how important it is to ensure girls are brought into the education system, and effort sometimes are being made, have been made in the past. We can't deny that. But the National Education Policy 2020 really actually has tried to understand what stops a girl from completing education in India, and what should be done. Not just give bicycles to girls, as has been done in the past, where the bicycles after a couple of months have been handed over to the brothers in the family. So it's not just transactional, but actually has tried to understand what stops a girl from completing education. And so areas of safety, security of girls has been brought in, which is extremely important in rural India, because girls have to go a long distance to school every day, and for the parents to feel safe and secure about their girls' safety has also been touched upon, and I hope it will be taken further. Then this interdisciplinary education, that is a new thing that has not been, it has been touched upon briefly in the Qatari Commission, but here it has been the interdisciplinary education, how it is important for the interplay of subjects, how important that is, has actually been given emphasis on. Then, of course, vocational education. I think it's important. I come from a sector where, because I run schools for street and slum children, it is assumed that street and slum children should do vocational education, and I have always fought against that. Not because vocational education is not important, but because it is wrong to assume that children that come from marginalized backgrounds have no other option but vocational education. We have to move away from that. My schools are all English medium. We follow the CBSE curriculum. My kids are in a national law school. My kids are software engineers, kids that I picked up from the streets about 13, 14 years ago. Potential is there in all children. And we as educators, we must acknowledge and recognize that potential. And we must take on the responsibility that it is our job. This is our mission and focus to unleash that potential. That's what schools and really, why are schools at all required? Today with COVID-19, aren't we realizing that we don't need walls and bricks and to create a school? A school can be created anywhere. We don't need textbooks. We don't need blackboards. But we need teachers, always teachers, because teachers are now beginning to see in reality that their role is not to just pass information. Their role is to coach children. And that, I think, has been addressed in the National Education Policy. And I'm really happy that emphasis has been given to teacher education. But let's go back to equity, because that's close to my heart. Because seriously, after COVID-19, it is estimated that nearly 10 million children will drop out of education. So all the money, all that we have spent in the last couple of years to universalize education is going to waste, because potential is going to go waste. So we need to identify why and how, what can we do? you know, I mean, Parikrma, my organization, we anticipated that the schools will, I mean, even if the government didn't come out with a diktat that the schools have to be closed, we realized by looking at what was happening around the world that it will come to India, and we will be in a situation where for our children's safety, we will have to keep our schools closed or marginally closed. We weren't too sure, lockdown hadn't happened, but we had started preparing to do online classes. So our online classes have been going on for nearly 4 months, whereas the government schools are still closed. Government children have been sent back to their villages because their parents have lost their jobs. There is no safety to be hanging around the streets, and they will not get back into education. So how will we as a country look at bringing in equity? And of course, equity is not just numbers, equity is also quality. And we have never paid attention to quality in the past. You know, I mean, I'm not talking about, elite schools here, because they are in a totally different, framework. But I'm talking about education for the vast majority of children. And I think I would have liked the national education policy to have paid a little more attention to that. I would have also liked the national education policy to have paid a lot more attention to special education. Not too, I mean, it has been talked about, but not too much. And I think so, you know, my recommendation here is all of us, we'll have to keep talking, keep fighting, keep verbalizing things that are missing in the national education policy, or flesh it out a little more. And we have to be the example and trend setters of what can be done and how we can take the NEP 2020. I think the mistake as citizens we have made in the past is we depend too much on the government, we depend too much on policies, and we give up, abdicate our own responsibility and the power we have to make the difference and make the change. And I think, therefore, the national education policy today needs to be looked at as a great springboard. It's an excellent springboard, but we cannot leave it just like that. We have to take it further, add more to it, and actually talk about the spirit of universalizing education, making it equal, and every child must be in school. Every child should be reading and writing and knowing numbers. Every child should be able to guess what the future is going to be and find and pave his own future, irrespective of the National Education Policy 2020. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Bose. That was really insightful and inspirational to hear from you, somebody who has been working in the policy space for so long and running successfully such brilliant schools in Bangalore. I can already see some questions in the chat box. We will be taking them at the last, but I have taken note of them. Anybody has any questions or comments, please use the chat box. I am also mindful of the time. We are about 40 minutes to go. We had 30 minutes for Q&A, but we'll try and finish on time, maybe 10 minutes over it, because it's such an interesting topic that we want to share maximum we can. So moving on to my next speaker, another distinguished educator and principal from Abu Dhabi in UAE. I'd like to introduce Mr. K. George Mathew. Mr. Mathew is an accomplished educationist heading GEMS United Indian School in Abu Dhabi as principal CEO. He has spent 27 years heading both international and Indian schools in the GEMS network in the UAE. Teaching and learning is his forte, and therefore his passion lies in curriculum design and assessment for learning. He is currently the convener for the Center of Advancement of Standards in Examination, CASE, a homegrown unit for conducting standardized examinations for GEM CBSE schools in the UAE. He is also the treasurer of the Gulf Council of CBSE schools for the last 3 years. He, as a person, believes in approach of education that blends academic learning with character and well-being. He is passionate about inclusive and inquiry-based education. It's an honor, Mr. Mathew, to have you here with us today. Please go ahead and share your feedback and comment on the education policy.
View of hi Ankur, can I hear? Can you hear? Have you switched on? Yeah, perfect. So Ankur actually has given a sweeping view of all aspects of the policy in the discussion. I think we are now into the noon of decoding NEP 2020. Noon it is because several politicians, academicians, originators of policy offered interpretations, analysis, and demystified this document. The other day I was appreciating our friend Ankur for bringing together a variety of perspectives onto this webinar today. We have representation from human resource, from universities in Canada, the US, and of course schools in India and the UAE. This year, 2020, is turning into a daunting year, isn't it? It brought in this gruesome pandemic, destabilizing institutions, families, and the way of life all over the world. But from such a fiery situation, the NEP 2020 emerges like a phoenix. I can visualize that, with renewed energy and hope for the future of education in the Indian subcontinent. So in such a context, I regard this policy more as a gift to unwrap than a policy to decode. So instead of saying decode NEP 2020, let's say unwrap NEP 2020. As Ankur said, I'm a lot into curriculum design, assessment, teaching and learning. That's what I'll be focusing on. And I might sound very optimistic, but why not? There are so many aspects in the policy that encourages the young learners to dream, to aspire to a brighter future, both at national and international levels. So friends, my point of view will focus on the products of NEP 2020, our own next-gen learners who will move on to choice universities at home or abroad, and eventually turn into rich human resource and live their lives meaningfully, perhaps lead tomorrow's world. So I'll briefly touch on terms that impact teaching and learning, the one that's close to my heart, the fodder for our students' growth and well-being. Now, while I was surfing through this policy document, I picked up a few pivotal terms that drive us all to meet and exceed the NEP expectations. For instance, many of you speakers, a couple of speakers before us have actually mentioned quite a lot of what actually I'm going to be focusing on. For instance, the inclusive education. This takes care of lots of kinds of learners. It's bereft of all types of biases, be it linguistic bias, cultural bias, gender bias, regional, intellectual, special needs, or gifted bias. The flexibility to choose regional language as a medium of instruction can also find a place in inclusive education. It is because differentiated instruction is the cornerstone of inclusive education. Multimodal learning and expression of learning is the answer to so many of such apprehensions. I can also spot a bias over memorization. Someone says memorization should be thrown out because the new policy is going to be actually throwing memorization out as a rote learning to be discarded as a useless learning tool. Now, if you go back into history, you'll find ancient wisdom transmitted to the next generation through recitation and memory. Even computers fill up their memory data as input to process information, apply higher order thinking, to transmit the outcome. Remember is the first step in the Bloom's cognitive development pyramid. So while memorization through repetition may serve short-term retention, association, visualization can help long-term memory. Therefore, the bias against memorization needs to be revisited. I would also include the bias-free international best practices and trends to be adopted into the inclusive education. In a multilingual, multicultural society, global citizenship being the keystone, the dynamism of inclusive education prepares our students for the present as well as the future. So come to think of it, even vocational learning can come under the umbrella of inclusive education. Teacher as a trainer and student as an intern is a great model. It's practically possible to facilitate vocational education through a capstone model of project-based learning. The opportunities to learn are limitless. So inclusive education is quite comprehensive and gives the schools greater flexibility and resilience to cross all barriers and impart equitable and quality education. The other term I picked up is pedagogical reformation. I do have certain anxieties to address while talking about pedagogical practices. I can see the whole more than the donut. NEP urges us to adopt multidisciplinary learning, problem-based, project-based learning, inquiry-based, and perhaps the latest trend of pheno-based learning. These forms of learner-centric, experiential, and outcome-based learning is the need of the hour today, no doubt. These practices can make our students competent and confident to excel in all occupations. But the moot question is, are we ready? Are our teachers sufficiently trained to take on this task? This is a slip between the cup and the lip. Some private elite schools are already there doing this, but how about rural schools in India? The divide is huge. The task is daunting, nevertheless, not impossible. And the good news is, NEP 2020 lays the roadmap. Dilli dur nahi hai, dikhai de rahi hai. Let me focus on another aspect picked up from the document. While curriculum design, pedagogy make one part of the whole, the other part is assessment and learning. If I may use a cliche, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? And assessment and learning is the eating part. Now, if you recollect, friends, a few years ago, CBSE initiated formative assessment model of measuring student progress and attainment. While the formative assessment practices were a part of all progressive education models in the world, a large part of Indian schools focused on high stakes term annual examination model. CBSE adopted this initiative and insisted all schools implement the policy. All progressive educationists welcomed the move with the same flair and fervor that we see today. However, the implementation took a beating. While some schools followed the system seriously, a few others made a mockery of it. Today, we have a similar progressive model recommended, rather mandated by the NEP 2020. Phase-wise common standardized tests are also part of the assessment program to establish parity in quality education at grade 3, grade 5, grade 8 levels. NEP initiates competency-based testing administered through formative assessment model. Again, my question is, are we ready? Are our teachers sufficiently trained to help students self-assess, peer assess, and measure individual progress? If we follow the letter and spirit of NEP 2020, yes, it's possible to get ready. The intent, the structure, and funds are made available for continuous professional development to support teachers. This CPD scaffolding can train teachers to design curriculum, adopt strategies of teaching and assessment, and thereby learning can be built as per the policy framework. I'm optimistic. The spirit of the policy will not be lost if the support system put in place by NEP 2020 does not crack under the pressure of finding the easy way out. Yes, NEP 2020 is utopian, it's aspirational, it's visionary. Our learners have the freedom to choose subjects of study across the board, subjects they are passionate about, they enjoy. They can enjoy dance and drama, art and artificial intelligence as much as they would enjoy other subjects. If schools can purpose the learning around the spirit of NEP 2020, it's achievable. And I think all of us in this big game of making 2020 happen, implement that, make it happen. Not too difficult to do it. Once you have the intent, you can go do it. So this is what I feel about it. It's pretty optimistic though, but then I have no doubt we can achieve it if we really follow the inclusive education model and train our teachers to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mathew. Thank you so much for those inspiring words. And I think you are right. We should celebrate the NEP rather than decode it. So thank you so much, sir, for your time. Probably moving on to my next speaker, Dr. Pavak Vyas from University of Waterloo in Canada. I would like to introduce Dr. Pavak. Dr. Pavak is an undergraduate recruitment officer at Faculty of Mathematics at University of Waterloo in Canada. The University of Waterloo is situated around 120 kilometers from Toronto University. University has been consistently ranked as Canada's most innovative university. He looks after a wide array of responsibilities in a busy, vibrant, and thriving academic environment. He has built universities' outreach strategies, is building the university's brand, and building strong relationships to admit academically bright students from India and abroad. Prior to moving to Canada, Dr. Pavak has over 20 years of experience in higher education field. He has headed admissions and recruitment at Ahmedabad University and Anand National University in Ahmedabad. He holds a PhD in business management and is a fellow of Judge Business School, University of Cambridge, UK. Thank you, Dr. Pavak, for joining us so early from Canada. I know it's really early for you in Canada. I appreciate you getting up so early for us. We look forward to hearing your views. Dr. Pavak, you have to unmute yourself.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry for that glitch.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, Ankur, for that generous introduction. And I am trying to be mindful of the time that you've given me for 10 minutes. So I'll try and wrap up my discussion in that. Okay, so I don't know, my computer is a little acting up. Okay, are you able to see my presentation right now?
No.
Okay.
You want me to run it for you?
Just a sec. I think
if you can't do it, I can run it for you.
Give me a second. I think I should
Sure.
be able to do it. Yes.
So in the meanwhile that you're putting up the presentation, just an announcement, we still have 30 minutes till the time we have. We'll try and close 10 minutes over time. So 5:40 is when we are looking at closing this. We will definitely look at questions. There are a lot of questions already in the chat box. We'll be taking those up shortly.
Ankur, I think it would be great if you can share.
Yeah, I can share it for you.
I think I'm having some technical issues here. I'm so sorry for that. Yeah.
No problem. Give me a second.
No problem.
I hope you can see the screen now for me.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So just to set the agenda, we'll talk about, according to me, this is my version of the National Education Policy of 2020. And being a higher education administrator and a teacher at universities and colleges in India, I have my own perspective of how the things are being looked as from the university's perspective. I had my learned colleagues talking about the higher education policy that is coming from the school's viewpoint, the young education. I'll talk about a little bit about the adult education of the things, and it's a vast policy. I think it is it is unfair for the policy to get covered in maybe an hour or a 2-hour discussion with all the big brains that we have here. So I'll try and touch upon the major aspects and then leave the floor open for discussion. I think that would be the best way to do it. So I'll talk about the context, the vision that goes in, what are the main focus that are really into, which are really keen or driving me to read this policy and the review of it overall. So if we go on to the next slide, please. The context, according to me, is the existing obsolete education policy. At least from the higher education viewpoint, if we see the first education policy came into existence, the formal education policy came into existence about 40 years from our independence. That got revised after 6 years. And then the next avatar came was after 30 years. So by and large, what we are talking about is gap of not maybe 5 years, like a planning commission that used to come up with a 5-year revision of the national plans and the economic plans. We are talking about an education policy which comes and gets revised every 3 decades. I mean, that's first thing to me, which is unacceptable. Education is changing, evolving so fast that we should have had an education policy that gets revamped at a specific period of time than to have a vision for 30-40 years and not keep it unchanged. So in that context, this was an extremely necessary, extremely important steps. Attributes of being a citizens have changed over last 20 or 30 years. We are becoming to a huge global phenomena. We have got hit by it. The things are changing. Education system per se has not changed. We are coming up with new fancier degrees. We are coming up with too many institutions, too many degrees, too many, basically we are just trying to plug system here and there to find out what we can do a new thing, but not the whole system overall that is required. And unfortunately, from my perspective, I do see a lot of deteriorating standards of education, severe grade inflation across all levels, from school to higher education. Moral standards are deteriorating. We are becoming a global citizen, but the incidences that you read in the newspapers are not telling us that we are a sensitive citizen towards environment, toward other human beings. Somewhere our education system is lacking. Look at the crime rate, look at the unemployability, look at the incidents that are happening, mob lynching and all. Somewhere our education requires to get overhauled and see how we can improve on that. So these are the contexts from which I see how this national education policy can have a great influence. Ankur, next, please. Thank you. So the national education policy aims to change the status quo, declutter the higher education space, make education more inclusive for all stratas of society, breaking silos of commerce, science, medicine, engineering to a more multidisciplinary education. Aim to have affordability of education. The regulatory system has become in a higher education completely ineffective. We have so many regulatory authorities. Most of the times they are trying to fight each other for their own space. And you will find, I always jovially told my students while I was in India that, if there is a date for NEET or a date for JEE or a date for something, don't worry about those dates, because the results are going to be delayed because someone is going to Supreme Court and challenge everything that has been done. So regulators have literally failed to a great extent. Governance issues do face a major issue in state universities as well as a few of the private universities and higher education institutes. Improving standards of education, and most importantly, what we see today is, infusion of technology in the education system. Today, if you who envisaged 2020 will be like this, and we had to compulsorily move on to online way of education. Everyone in higher education field said, let us have education and technology, and the technology was only PPT. That was all. So good to have COVID. In a way, these are the positive effects of COVID. I would say that we are now started to use technology, of course, with all the ups and downs of it. Quality of education and research is one big focus, and India strives to have more Nobel laureate coming out of India. Typically the Nobel laureates that you would see who are Indian based probably work beyond Indian borders to come out, and we need to have quality of education, quality of research coming out from within Indian borders. And of course, preparing to cater a large population boom hitting higher education. We are looking at a huge population boom year after year coming, and the typically the two-child policy that India had in 1980s and 1990s, those two childs have become four childs, and four childs are now, their generation is coming. So basically we are talking about a multiplying effect of number of people hitting the higher educational institutions in coming years, and are we able to gearing up for that, are the things that we are looking at it. Ankur, please next. Thank you. So we are looking at revamping. The policy looks at revamp, restructure, and consolidate higher education space from large multidisciplinary higher educational institutions. So typically, if you see, there are polytechnics, there are ITIs. If you're looking at a +12, +10 education in India, there are ITIs, there are polytechnics, there are colleges, there are universities, there are IITs, there are IIMs. So many things trying to do it, which more or less live in their silos. So instead of that, consolidate them to have one or few ways of having a multidisciplinary higher educational institution. Redefining the college and universities. So colleges will be small, predominantly doing the undergraduate teaching work, and they will be degree granting. They will be teaching focused. So basically, they are looking at the colleges which are more imparting skills and are teaching focused. Whereas universities will become large, will have undergraduate and graduate, will be highly research intensive and high quality teaching. So if you look at American or a Canadian system, we have the same thing. Here the colleges are more or less providing the undergraduate degrees, entry level jobs are being prepared, the professionals which are being prepared for that. But the day you want to go higher, maybe after some work experience, you get into a university, do your master's, research intensive, PhD and stuff like that. High quality public and private higher educational institutions. So what we are looking at is quality, and both in public and private sector higher educational institutions. We see today, and Ankur and Kala and other my colleagues will agree to it, that though every district should have a university, we are seeing every city to have half a dozen universities, a private university. And the standards of those private universities are questionable. Not all have the kind of infrastructure, the kind of faculty members, the kind of vision that these large Kriyas and Ashokas and OP Jindals and of the worlds are doing. These are 5-6 new age universities. They are doing phenomenal, but then you will find out that a lot requires to be done. And a single stream higher education institute will be phased out. We no longer want those people who only give a BCom degree, or who only give a BSc degree, or who only gives a BTech degree. We move out to a more multidisciplinary system. So holistic multidisciplinary education is what it is being envisaged, which says that integration of humanities, arts, and social sciences with STEM. Why can't an engineer study accounting, or why can't a chemistry graduate study marketing? And that's where the integration comes in. Philosophy, English, literature, those are the kind of things that come in. Uh, Very importantly, what I love most about this policy is flexibility. Finally, it is here, and I will agree. I hope my people on the schooling side would agree to it, that finally we start appreciating gap years in the education. Why do you think education is a linear thing? That you do class 12, then you have to go to a university or a college, then you have to do your masters, and finally after 23 years of your education you come out in the industry to say, give me a job or let me produce a job. The best way to do it is have a gap, go in the market, experiment yourself, see what you like, and then come back and study those things, which was lacking. And we were thinking gap in the education was biggest issue. No, it was not the biggest issue. I think it was the most appreciable thing a kid was doing in India. Multiple exit options in a program. We are not in a train that goes from point A or city A to city B. There has to be exit option. And finally, we have therefore a 3 and a 4-year undergraduate degree. I remember while I was in India, there was a major hue and cry that Delhi University offering a 4-year undergraduate degree, and there was a nationwide debate, protest, and I think they had to roll it back. So finally, we have a 3 to 4 years of undergraduate program, and universities have an option to offer these exit options to the kids. So if a student finishes 1 year, that's a certificate program. He can take or she can take exit after that. 2 year is a diploma, 3 year is a bachelor's degree. 4 years, if you finish and take an exit, it's like an honors or a multidisciplinary bachelor's, and 5 years is an integrated master's. So typically at every year you have an exit option with some takeaways, and you can go out in the market, try something that you like and move on. Master's degree also have become flexible. Why master's degree has to be a 2-year degree? Why can't you have you look at the number of years. If it is 12 plus 4 plus 1, fine, or you can have all those things. And most importantly, though I am being affected a little bit here, so entry to PhD after 4 years bachelor's. While I did my PhD, I did my BCom, I did my MCom, I did my MPhil, and finally I got into my PhD and graduate with a PhD degree after 35 years from Gujarat University, which is the biggest one in Gujarat. Why can't you do, if you're focused on research, why can't you go after a decent bachelor's degree? So these are the kind of flexibility which provides, which is phenomenal. Uh, Faculty development and upgradation. I think this was, as Samir did amplify this at the schooling level, but we at university level have the same issue. Teachers are becoming obsolete. The technology is becoming way ahead, way faster, going ahead, and probably if you see the age gap between a teacher and a student is about 20 to 30 years. While I was teaching in a class, my student who's sitting in my class was like about 20 years younger to me. So I'm already 2 generations obsolete. Typically, the social media, the whole technology has taken hold, and therefore teachers is a profession, and you need to upgrade. There is a need for professional development. So teaching at school or higher education to be considered as a professional, and professional development is extremely important. Teachers are lifelong learners. You cannot get a degree and be in your educational institutions and then teach for rest 20 years of your life. No, that's gone. Universities and UGC had some of those teachers refresher and those programs, but actually those weren't doing that well because they were executed in a poor way. Faculty also needs performance-based promotion system. You do not get by the rule of government that you have been into 5 years as assistant professor, so now you can be an associate professor. That's not how things work. You have to perform. You have to upgrade yourself. You have to publish research. Your teaching feedbacks are matters. Then only you move ahead. It's not by number of age in the years, but it is more by your deservingness to be a prof. And of course, for school level, the complete revamp of the B.Ed program is going to be very important for that. Equity and inclusion. Equity in education for all socio-economic class. We look at some of the universities, some of the colleges have become extremely elitist. Even for that matter, elitist not in terms of only finance, but in terms of the education standards. The difficulty to get in is becoming phenomenally difficult. So that is being challenged here and probably being changed. Financial assistance to disadvantaged class is going to be provided. So if it does not matter what socio-economic class from finance side you are coming to, but you are going to, irrespective of your caste, creed, you are getting a financial aid to you study ahead. Admission process to be made more inclusive. I think Ankur did talk about ridiculous cutoffs in the higher education system and into universities and certain programs across the year. So we are going to change that, and that's going to be much more inclusive. No discrimination and no harassment will be the rule of thumb. So typically the ragging and the kind of issues that we had will not be tolerated, and it will be much more inclusive for all stratas of society. One major issue that again higher education in India, institutions in India face is regulatory environment. I believe if you have to number the regulators, if you are running a nursing program or a medical program or an engineering program or an architecture program, I am sure you are going to miss a few regulators' name. Consolidating and redefining roles of UGC, AICT, NAC, Bar Council, Medical Council, Council of Education, Architecture is going to be taken up, which is a very, very welcome step, because I would find all the registrars of the university getting confused whose jurisdiction is that, and every time you get a letter from them about claiming it is their jurisdiction. Governance and leadership of higher educational institute also pose a major challenge. You look at the state-run universities typically, which have been under the great political influence, typically the Senate and syndicate and Vidyarthi Parishads, taking care of all the leadership and trying to make their way out just because of we are a mobocracy instead of democracy. So that's where the whole thing is going to get changed. Commercialization of education will get curbed, and more public, philanthropic and private universities and higher educational institutions are being envisaged and being encouraged. And of course, independent, autonomous governance of higher education. We want to have higher education free from all the external influences. So let's have politics out, hopefully one day, and we move it. So from my viewpoint, if I have to summarize, this is an extremely positive step for higher education in India, as the people, every one of us feel it. However, the challenge lies in implementation. This is like the best that India can have, but even if we are able to have even 50% of what is being envisaged here, I think we would have done a great progress, to me, which even look challenging right now, being really honest about it. You will find references to nationalism if you read. We are going back to Takshashilas of the world and those universities of the world. So Indian culture, what they call it. So I am fine with that, as long as we are becoming a pluralistic society. I'm more open to accept those views of government or certain sections of the society as well. So that was more or less my view of it, and I'll be happy to answer a question around this thing. Thank you, Ankur, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pavak, for that insightful presentation. Moving on to our next speaker, Ms.Kala Anand. Kala Anand is the Director for Communication, Partnerships and Career Services at Krea University in Chennai. Kala comes with significant education industry experience, working in strategic roles at major international private education companies and government organizations, including Government of Singapore and Government of Australia. She has spent 15 years at senior professional tenure. She has provided advisory services to international universities and government agencies, enabling them to expand their global footprint. She has developed successful collaborative partnerships for international universities with key stakeholders across different parts of the world, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Middle East region. She has participated and presented at national and international conferences across Australia, Singapore, Dubai, and various other countries. She holds an MBA from SP Jain Institute of Management Research, India, and a diploma in digital marketing from DMI, Ireland. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Kala. Please go ahead and share your feedback.
Thank you, Ankur, and hello to all the fellow panelists and to a fantastic audience that's still hanging in there to listen to us. So it's been a long Saturday afternoon, so we're very grateful to you for our time. I think, you know, from the different perspectives, everybody's touched on a little bit, and my role here is to look at NEP from a higher education institution perspective. Yes, to me, the NEP is directional. So although it sets a vision document, most aspects of the policy look at a 15-year timeline. So in that sense, it gives us a certainty and less ambiguity in terms of the big question, by when do we have to get this going? So the NEP has many elements. We've heard some social, some, you know, purely academic, economic, the psychological aspect of it, and the political aspect of it as well. So which means the policy definitely has something for every stakeholder in the education ecosystem. And hence the perspectives or the insights or the takeaway is going to be very vast and varied. From a higher education angle, I'm here to share some of my observations, and these are not necessarily all encompassing, but these are some key highlights that I've picked up from the plan, and these are my take 5, if you like. I think the NEP is actually becoming a learner and learning centric policy than to a qualification centric policy. So what happens is the policy is putting the learner at the center of the ecosystem, and this is extremely important for India. So this is about going away from a prescribed rigid structure of this degree, this many units to this qualification, to something more broader. So instead of us producing similar looking products as John alluded earlier from a factory that are a result of an automated process, it allows us to look at each learner as an individual. Right? And this has been the success of some of the best teaching universities of the world. Now, if I have to draw some parallels from other service sectors, and I'm very tempted to do so sometimes with education sector, is there was a time when we were all chained, we or our parents were chained to our seats to watch a particular program at a particular time that would air on a particular day. And that's changed today. As consumers today, we can view any content we want at any time we want, on any day we want, and our individual experiences are varied. Right? So this has happened with the food industry, it's happened with the accommodation, with transport, with hospitality. Every service sector there has seen a positive disruption in some sort of way. So education in that sense should not be far behind, because at the end of the day, if we are delivering a purpose of advanced learning for each individual that seeks it, let us look at the way in which it's delivered differently, and let's put the learner at the center of that entire delivery mechanism. And hence the ability for students to choose from across disciplines, to equip themselves with life skills, to seek career support, welfare support from universities, all of this indicate that the student and learning is central to the system and all else needs to work around it. So that's my first takeaway. The next takeaway for the higher education institutions is that foster collaboration and not competition. If we are talking about an enrollment ratio of nearly doubling by 2035, yes, you could go ahead and create new institutions, but let's not forget the power of collaboration. And in some way, the NEP talks about, you know, in this word that they use called consolidating, they actually prompt some level of this collaboration. And this is not just between disciplines by breaking down the department silos, but also it comes as good news in terms of interdisciplinary applied research. So most higher education institutions have focused on basic research, worked within departments, and hence breaking down the objective of research to address challenges in a way is going to force a lot of institutions to devise a challenge-based research vision, and that is going to be a very welcome move. The single stream higher education institutions, as mentioned earlier, is going to be phased out, right? So the individual colleges offering maybe engineering, commerce, and sciences streams are going to be phased out over the 15-year period, and more autonomy will be granted to the new setup multidisciplinary HEIs. So in this particular setup, the larger multidisciplinary universities are going to take a mentorship role with the affiliate. Now, what this is going to allow is more hyperlocal collaboration between institutions. A lot of focus historically we have placed with global partnerships. And there has been very less incentive for HEIs within a region or a zone to work more closely together. And with the recognition of also the ODL credits, the distance learning credits into mainstream credit system, we can anticipate far more collaboration than before. To me, clearly the NEP is prompting such collaboration, and importantly, it's incentivizing HEIs to take that mentor route. And beyond the mentor route, I think what's a very interesting highlight is the accreditation will become a binary process. Now, this is fantastic because while NAC will offer its accreditation, it's going to give some institutions a certain level of status to become a recognized accreditor. If you are familiar with the International Baccalaureate System, the IB, the IBO does something very similar. It trains individuals to go to schools and accredit them to the IB system. So in a way, HEIs are going to have this level of responsibility. So it's really, I think, making the HEIs more responsible. The third key takeaway for me is the NEP really talks about a flexible credit system, moving away from the rigid credit system. And let me kind of break this down into 4 areas of how the credit system might actually be working if the NEP comes into force. Some welcome changes are credit based on learning goals. So it's not just based on what's of the academic, but really marking them into learning goals. So this is going to demand for HEIs to make a deeper emphasis on pedagogy and by discipline. So institutions that actually have advanced centers of pedagogy can see themselves offering this expertise within and outside. Credits for holistic education. So the HEIs have been asked to come up with flexible and innovative curricula, and as part of that, they would like to look at community engagement and service for credits. Again, it puts the emphasis back on social impact work by young students and rewarding them for it. Very similar to the International Baccalaureate system that I remember, where service is a very important part of awarding the diploma. And the credit for the distance learning units, which is as part of the bachelor's as well. So you could very well take credits from an external institution or from an online platform if your own institution did not provide it. Again, this is something I'm hoping that HEIs will be encouraged to look at hybrid programs and not just at degree levels, but multiple entry and exit points as proposed by the NEP. And credits for foreign university courses. I think this might be a very interesting game changer if any awards acquired at the foreign university will be permitted to be built into the award of a degree. But importantly, more than the conventional degree partnerships, I would like to see this translating to the continuous learning domain, especially the focus on foreign languages that the NEP places that all HEIs should provide. And that's something that can grow in partnership. So to me, the academic bank of credit, which the NEPC talks, the ABC, is almost like a learning portfolio that each student is going to have. And each portfolio is going to look different. It's not a standard mark sheet with the same set of subjects and grades on the right. So each is going to look like a portfolio, and in a lot of sense, that is an investment that they are making in education, and hence each portfolio should have its own different kind of outcome. The fourth is really enhanced academic support that the institutions have to give beyond delivering degrees. So gone are the days when institutions think they only have to deliver a degree, because the role of a higher education institution has been redefined by the NEP. So if the purpose of education is now redefined to be holistic beyond offering qualifications, then the HEIs also have to build an academic support function to support this. For instance, there is a focus on improving employability. So as part of their role to offer holistic education, HEIs will need to create opportunities for employability, industry internships or research internships. Now, this is going to call for career support system within every HEI, which is not something that was present as mandated before. The artists in residence, that's such a welcome news. So to ensure that connection between tech or science with creativity and the arts, the policy recommends that every higher education institution should have an artist in residence. This is actually a very perceptive move, and probably why some of the new age liberal education institutions have already included arts practitioners as professors within their faculty. Besides that, the HEIs have to have a focus on mental health support, student facilities, support to those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So you can say holistically, it's no longer about delivering a qualification, but about an academic experience, which the learner is actually going to enjoy. And that focus is going to be important. And lastly, I think building a very robust research ecosystem is really at the center of what the NEP is proposing, and breaking away from research silos. And in that too were very interesting observations. One is developing the research competency. I think the focus on developing research competencies right at the undergraduate level is a much needed move. The ability for students with a 4-year undergraduate qualification to move forward to obtain a research degree, or the flexibility to earn credits for research internships. All this adds significantly, and it develops an appetite for research studies at a very early age. I really like the analogy that I draw on great sporting nations, right? So great sporting nations are built on the foundation of grassroots sports, and they make sports an everyday conversation. So, and hence, nations that have high performing research have mandated research embedded within schools and colleges, and that is important to start that talent very early. Also, the bifurcation of the HEI network into research and teaching universities, I think, is a very intelligent move as well in the right direction. The power of AI has been suitably recognized by the policy, and hence the focus on promoting applied research within AI is definitely a good direction. It's very heartening to note that the emphasis on AI to address global challenges and social good has been picked up, with healthcare, agriculture, and I think climate change finding the top spot as well. So HEIs who have existing domain expertise in this area could well set themselves for advanced work. And hence, to summarize, my 5 key takeaways are HEIs have to go learner and learning centric. They have to foster collaboration and not live in a world of competition. They should prepare themselves for a flexible credit system, and they have to build academic support as they move forward into larger institutions, and importantly, early on develop a robust research ecosystem. And all this is supported through the National Higher Education Qualification Framework. We definitely need a unified framework in India. I mean, we have all these lateral entries, and whether we go linear or lateral needs to come together with the qualification framework, the multidisciplinary education and research universities, and the academic bank of credit. Clearly, the internationalization in India is a fantastic initiative in there, and we'd love to see what's going to happen and how HEIs translate that. Clearly, the challenges are evident, training teachers to this changing learner profile and constantly adapting curriculum to world events and the changes that's happening. Those challenges will remain, and one can always debate about the implementation. But I go back and think, even in a large organization where leadership is constantly finding ways for every employee to understand and implement the vision and the mission statement. So these challenges of mission and vision statements are across the board. It's not particular to just government. So in that sense, I think the NEP is a clear signal that the policymakers are willing to come the halfway mark. It is now up to the HEIs to articulate some of this into achievable milestones over the next 15 years and make this policy work well in favor of the institutions, in the favor of the nation, but importantly, in favor of the learner. Thank you so much, Ankur, and I do look forward to hearing all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kala, for that wonderful, insightful presentation. A really interesting take and really informative. Thank you so much, audience, for hanging in there. As Kala mentioned, we are running over time, but I can still see there are about 100+ people there. Waiting to hear from our next speaker. We'll be taking Q&A post Anubhooti finishes her take on the subject. But there are already a lot of questions, and I'll try to do justice to all of them. So hold on for another 10 to 12 minutes. My next speaker is Anubhooti Arora. Anubhooti Arora works as the higher education policy specialist at the US Embassy in New Delhi, India. She as a senior Indian team member, she supports the public affairs section efforts in strengthening the bilateral partnership and advises the section's leadership on all aspects of the relationship, including the nuances of the Indian higher education system and the government machinery that supports it. She coordinates the embassy's $2 million research partnership grant to support existing US-India research collaborations in 10 areas of strategic importance. Prior to joining the embassy, she was an Education USA advisor working for the State Department's Education USA program. As an advisor, she guided hundreds of Indian students aspiring to seek an education in the United States for over 6 years. She represented Education USA at prestigious conferences like NAFSA, IACAC, and visited several US universities. She began her career working in the non-profit sector, where she led corporate fundraising efforts for international organizations like Plan International India and United Way of Mumbai. She is a graduate of School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, India. It's an honor to have you, Anubhooti, here with us. We'll be happy to hear your thoughts on the national education policy. Please take it.
Thank you so much, Ankur, and thank you so much all of the panelists and the audience today. It's indeed been a long evening, so I promise to keep it very short. A lot of the ideas that the panel has already talked about of access, equity, and quality are ones that I share. The new education policy is a very progressive document. It addresses many critical issues and problems that Indian higher education has been facing for a very long time. The policy envisions itself as to completely overhaul and re-energize Indian education system. If implemented in letter and spirit, this can really be a watershed moment for India, and it can help Indian children and young people achieve their utmost potential. At least in my lifetime, this is the first time I saw a Prime Minister come on television and talk about national television and talk about, the different aspects of the policy. He very beautifully touched upon some critical areas. I'm going to talk about the higher education aspect, and specifically internationalization of higher education, because that's an area that I work in. So there are some excellent recommendations in the policy that the panel has already covered. I'm going to focus on 4 aspects. The first, to transform all Indian universities into multidisciplinary colleges and universities by 2040, including the Indian Institutes of Technology, and to introduce a course credit transfer system that Kala just spoke about, and setting up the academic bank of credit. That's one highlight. The second one is the introduction of a 4-year undergraduate degree with multiple exit options that, again, a lot of the panelists have spoken about. The third, allowing the world's top 100 universities to set up campuses in India. And finally, synergistic partnerships with a diverse array of organizations, the non-profit sector, the private sector. Now let's start discussing each of these 4. When I read the policy, as somebody who has been educated in the UK and somebody who now represents the US higher education system, it almost appeared to me, that the policy, the Indian higher education system, is actually being Americanized. You see the idea of the 4-year undergraduate education system. You see the emphasis on the liberal arts education aspect and multidisciplinary education. Kala spoke a little while about, it's that education is not just at teaching students. It's not just content and syllabi. It's actually providing students in the higher education institutions an array of services and providing them a holistic, comprehensive experience, that includes career services, that includes experiential learning, it includes mental health services, and the likes. I was very happy with the 4-year education system. Ankur just spoke that I had been an Education USA advisor. I had the opportunity to interact with hundreds of Indian undergraduates and high school students as an advisor. A lot of the undergraduate students, very good ones, at Delhi University, several other universities across the country, with a 3-year undergraduate degree, often wanted to go and pursue their education in the US. And some of them found it difficult because of the 3-year undergraduate degree, as the US higher education has a 4-year undergraduate degree. So they had to actually go to the World Evaluation Services and get credentials evaluated to demonstrate that their 3-year degree was equivalent to a 4-year American degree. Now, thankfully, this policy offers students the option of actually doing a 4-year degree, doing a research intensive degree. Now, that's going to augur really well for student and scholar mobility to the US. I think one of the speakers in the panel also spoke about how when an Indian student does a 4-year degree with a research component, he or she will have it easy to go and pursue a PhD program or a doctoral program in the US. So it actually makes it very easy now for Indian students to seamlessly transfer to some of the best universities in the world. So that's one thing I would say. The option of pursuing a four-year degree will also, allow them to, the academic bank of credit is an excellent idea, the transfer of credits. It's going to allow for Indian students not just to go to institutions abroad and transfer their credits if they want to transfer, but it will also allow students to domestically, be mobile. So a student who's, let's say, at OP Jindal may want to, let's say, pursue a particular course at Ashoka because, let's say there is a great law program at OP Jindal, and a Ashoka student is interested in that. Jindal students is interested in pursuing a politics or a development economics program because the faculty for such programs are really good and bring some interesting, research experience behind them. That is going to be possible through the academic bank of credit and the national framework. So I think it's going to really help students become more mobile domestically and internationally. In the US, we all know that there is a consortia system. So there are universities and colleges that get together that have complementary capabilities, complementary academic, strengths, and it's not uncommon for students to, utilize each other's facilities, different universities' facilities. So hopefully, this policy is going to take us in that direction, which is why I said it's almost like it Americanizes in some sense Indian higher education. I mean that as a compliment. The other aspect of multidisciplinary education is laudable. We all know that global problems today they're very nuanced, and you cannot, find solutions to grand challenges of the world by just pursuing and looking at them from a particular discipline. I mean, take, for example, COVID and other infectious diseases. You need to have a bouquet of experts. You need to have, a multidimensional and a multidisciplinary understanding in order to address challenges such as the pandemic and several other problems like climate change, for example. So really glad that the policy is looking at enabling and empowering Indian leaders of the future with a multidisciplinary perspective. But within this opportunity, there is also a challenge. And the challenge is that the teachers who are teaching these students, and Pavak spoke about it, there is a huge generation gap. A lot of them have not sort of undergone a multidisciplinary education themselves. So there needs to be a concentrated, comprehensive capacity building of teachers. There has to be a lot of intra-learning, intra-faculty learning. So learning at the level of the institution itself, and learning that comes through, let's say, foreign collaborations where Indian faculty get exposed to, faculty from different universities across the world, and there's a lot of cross-learning that happens. So I think the challenge there is to equip faculty with the skills to actually translate multidisciplinary education within the classroom. I would finally like to talk about the policy's very progressive move to open up Indian higher education to the top 100 education institutions in the world. I mean, there was a similar sort of bill that was tabled in the parliament in 2010, but it did not talk about top 100. It was kind of open, allowing foreign educators to come into India. Now that could have been a little tricky. So I think this policy, the fact that it only allows the top 100 institutions to come into India, is a really good thing, because that's going to preserve the quality of the institutions that come into India. You will not be having a run-of-the-mill, you will not be having degree mills coming into India. So the Indian learner is protected, and it's not to enable profitability of foreign institutions, but actually to enhance and expand the opportunities available to Indian students. I also think this is going to have an excellent cascading effect on Indian higher education system. When we have some of the best universities of the world come into India, it will actually inspire a lot of our universities to up their game and also a lot of collaboration will organically, over a period of time, happen between faculties of Indian institutions and faculties of institutions that come from abroad. That said, I want to bring this, I want to sort of add in a hint of realism to this. Not every top 100 university may want to come into India. Every university, whether it's British or an American university, will have their own sort of policies on foreign campuses. So I was talking to the Vice Provost for International Relations at Harvard University recently, who did a webinar for us on the future of higher education. He said that Harvard actually does not have a model to set up branch campuses. However, if you look at Yale University, which is another excellent American university, very reputed, they have a model of setting up campuses across the world. So you know, if we live in a world that we think tomorrow there will be a Hyderabad, there will be a Harvard in Hyderabad, and you know, another Boston and Bombay, that may not happen. I mean, it may happen in a sort of a more graded format where specific schools of a particular university come, or they forge partnerships with, you know, the new age universities like Kriya, Ashoka, Jindal, Shivnadar, Ahmedabad University, and others to offer collaborative degrees. So that may be the future of, you know, internationalization. And I think it's actually important that it's in a graded fashion. Also, foreign universities will have to look into budgets, because setting up an entire campus in a foreign land is actually a very, very requires a lot of investment. And currently, with in COVIDian times, when universities across the world are facing crunch in terms of finances, you may not see this happen tomorrow. And I think the Indian government should work on a solid, transparent regulatory framework that allows ease of doing business and transparency to foreign universities to set up campuses, programs, offices in India. Finally, I'd just like to end by taking a minute to talk about industry-academia collaborations. We've seen in the case of COVID how everybody knows Adar Poonawala. Everybody knows about the Serum Institute of India today. So the Serum Institute of India is collaborating with Oxford University's Jenner School, as well as a British-Swedish pharmaceutical, AstraZeneca, to develop a COVID vaccine. In the US, for example, you also have Moderna, which is actually an offshoot of Georgia Tech. In India, you have Bharat Pharmaceuticals, which founders of which are actually educated and taught at the University of Minnesota, and are working with scientists at the University of Minnesota to develop vaccines. So, you know, private sector partnership with academia is very important. Not only is it going to keep academia updated, involved in latest research and development exercises, but it's also going to have far-reaching benefits for society. And the social impact aspect that a lot of my colleagues talked about today. So I would say, I would reiterate what Shukla spoke about earlier, that it's very important to realize that this policy is just not, you can't just leave it to the government. It has to be a combined effort. We have to build synergies between education institutions, faculty, students, non-profits, as well as the private sector, to work together to realize some of the excellent recommendations enshrined in the policy, as well as foreign governments. I mean, foreign governments have a very important role to play in supporting the development of Indian institutions and collaborating to create, to sort of work on responses to global problems that require a local thinking combined with a global understanding. So I would end it at that, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Anubhooti, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your views. I think they are very relevant and very, very far-sighted. Thank you so much. I'll just quickly move on to take the question round now. I'll take probably about 7 to 8 minutes on the Q&A. There are a lot of questions. I'll try to club them together. First, I'd like to begin by talking about the school section. There are, I think if school leaders can talk about that. One of the questions is from Vinay Kumar, and there are multiple questions on the same thing from Rakesh and Simi from Doha. The question is, how do you plan to upskill teachers. What do you think is required for teachers to be reskilled to teach in the new way that is being envisioned in NEP? It's easy to. Another part of that question is, how do you plan to change the attitude and mindset of the individuals that have been working in a same kind of a curricula for so long? So the emphasis is on schools. What are your thoughts on that? So Samir, if we can begin with you, and probably then we can work it around this question.
Just a very quick brief story. I think that's something we generally quote in our classes also, that a HR manager goes to the director of the institution and said, I've got allocation of these many budgets for human resource training. And the director asked, our attrition rate has been sitting at 19%, and you are bringing a budget of almost 35% hike from last year's training cost. What if all these people leave? And the answer of HR manager was, what if all these people stay? Right? So that's the chicken and the hen situation. I think teacher training has been a very underplayed and a very very ad hoc decision for most of the schools around the world. I mean, around the country. But for here, I can talk about India. There is no deliberate effort to make a teacher training curriculum based on the changing needs and the pedagogies around the world. I belong to a very advantaged school, so I mean, I don't want to talk about us. We have heavy investments in teacher training because we believe what if all these teachers stay back in the system. But I think, first of all, what do they need training for also is a question. So I think that clarity needs to come from within the institution, because one size will not fit all. Again, within the private sector, when we say private sector school, we can't bundle them up in one category. Within private sector, there are ones who are highly resourced, there are under-resourced, there are moderately resourced. So I think one thing, if anything, is to be successful, I think a public, private, and academia partnership has to come together to come up with a training plan which is over a period of 3 to 5 years, where people's attitudes can be changed, because attitude cannot be changed with anything. It has to be a continuous effort, right? So I think management has to commit a certain budgetary allocation to teacher training. The academia, great universities like Kriya, OP Jindal, I've been to both universities. I wish I can go back and study. I wish I was a youngster and born in this time to go to the universities such as yours, to come in partnership with school and government document, because you folks can decipher it very well. You find of people from multidisciplinary approach who are teaching in that model to create shorter capsules of teacher training program, and the funding has to come from somewhere, particularly for government schools.
I just want
thank you, Samir.
But there is no one answer to this question.
Yeah, thank you, Samir. Yes, Anubhooti, you had something to share.
Very quickly, I think one of the recommendations of the policy is to have a 4-year integrated teacher training course. I think that's a absolutely fantastic recommendation. So if you want to be a teacher, you enroll in that program, and there is a certain level of commitment. Being a teacher is not a second thought, but it's your first thought when you enroll in that program. And I know that the Azim Premji University had a role. They had somebody. They had their vice chancellor on the committee of the NEP, of the draft NEP, and this was probably one of the suggestions coming from them. I think it's a great suggestion. And the reason why I sort of interfere on this is because my mother has been a teacher educator at the University of Rajasthan, and very unknowingly, all through my childhood, I've kind of witnessed the issues and the problems that face teacher training in India. And that really is the bedrock to ensuring that our kids are learning well in school. It's one of the most important components. And a 4-year integrated degree, as envisioned in the national education policy, is a really good idea. I also think Samir's idea of shorter programs to build capacity of teachers is excellent. And it cannot just be, the onus cannot just be on the government. It has to come also from the education institutions.
Yeah, I think, Ankur, I could pick up from what Anubhooti said and also what Samir said, because that's one of the things that I raised myself in trying to deliver the inclusive education, all comprehensive, meeting all the needs of the universities of tomorrow. So what Anubhooti said is, for the future, the ones who want to actually go do their training for 4 years will be the next crop that's going to come in, and that will be the next gen, will be 4 years down the line to see. And what Samir was talking about is with the current situation, how is it that the government should pitch in with funding and some training companies, training programs or training institutes coming in and pitching for that. I have one more to add to that, and that is every school has its own culture, its own ethos, its own key people who we call as catalyst teachers. I don't believe that there are schools that are having no catalyst teacher, or there are schools that are not having any good teaching teachers who understand the actual trends of education. Every school will have, must have. And in case they don't, they should be twinning with other schools that they have and then have a kind of a share program. But then if you have the catalyst teachers within your school, then you can actually turn into a tripods, or you can train the trainer kind of a thing. And the school leadership is so important to actually push that forward. School leaders need to be very clear, and they should be having their own training bags full of it, which they can share. And there's so many model lessons that are happening all around. The digital age is so much so good that you can actually bring in quite a lot of in-house training that can happen modular way, and develop their additional qualifications for each of their skills. They want to develop the numeracy skills or literacy skills or teaching and learning skills or whatever learning strategies. It can all be moduled and given to them. And it's not too difficult. If you have the will, you should be able to do it within your own school units. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Ms. Bose, if you want to.
Ankur, I feel we only talk about training actually. I don't think training alone doesn't bring transformation. To create a change of attitude, you've got to reignite pride in the teaching profession. So we, about 5 years ago, started a teacher training center. We provide free training to government school teachers. We have trained about nearly 2,000 teachers. We hope through that we're transforming at least 63,000 children across government schools. All we do is make them feel good about having chosen teaching profession. And once you get that sense of pride in what you do, and you're able to give them a purpose, I think that's the government spends a fair amount of money by sending them for workshops and seminars, but that's not going to create the transformation. The transformation is only going to have if they find some goal and purpose in what they're doing.
Absolutely true. I think I agree with you, Ms. Bose. Thank you so much for bringing that up. My next question is from Ankit Jain from Hyderabad. He works for an organization called One Window. He says, and I think Kala, you can take it up. He says, will NEP bring in new potential for education tourism in India? Will international students look towards India for some kind of programs? I know NEP talks about yoga courses and those kind of programs about Indian arts and culture. If you can take this up, what do you think?
Sure. I think it's going to grow an interest in India, and I think centering just back to yoga and arts and culture is a very small part. I think Indian history, Indian politics, Indian social structures have so much to offer. So, for instance, each of our universities, the new age universities, many of our professors come with such a history of experience, rich experience in just Indian studies. So at Kriya, for instance, we've got global partnerships purely for Indian studies, because we know that we have a set of faculty who comes with that experience. So over time, we're beginning to see this interest from international student communities and universities that just want to do an understanding India engagement with us. So this I think is a very interesting space in which it will grow. This whole internationalization in India is going to happen. Again, it goes back to what's higher education, right? When we talk about internationalization, higher education, we're always talking about MOUs and sending students outside. But we forget about internationalization being how do you bring international students into this diversity? How do you get students from across both hosts to work on a project together? How do you bring internationalization in curriculum? And all this will happen, I think, as this puts out. The NEP has done two positive things. As I said, if your foreign degree courses what you acquire as credits can go into your degree, plus the opening up of Indian studies will definitely attract. And already we have a Go India initiative that's doing quite well. And I think this whole misnomer of understanding India, because for business students, India has always been a fantastic place to come and understand. If you have a solution that can work in India, in the scale, in the diversity of languages that we have, you kind of have created a fantastic business tech solution. So both in terms of learning, in terms of unpacking what India has to offer, I see that only growing, and I think it's already grown in the 5 years. And I'm going to see that irrespective of COVID, it doesn't mean people have to travel. I think this kind of engagement will happen. Increasingly, I always have somebody or the other inviting us to talk about India in any of their global leadership conferences. And hence, it's definitely going to happen, no doubt about that. And that will definitely boost organizations. And I wouldn't just call it about tourism, but I would say student engagement, international student engagement with India studies would probably be, the way to go.
Thank you, Kala. Then there are a couple of questions around, I think, Pavak, you can take it up. It says, there are a lot of, almost 500,000 students go abroad for higher education from India. We are one of the largest sending countries to US, Canada. It talks about post NEP. Do you think that tide stemming or those dollars that go abroad staying back in India? What is your take? Probably University of Waterloo thinking about setting up something in India. So if you can talk about that, what is your thing? And there are a couple of persons. This is from Rakesh from Kuwait, and there's Suresh from Dubai. So if you can talk about if NEP helps stemming that tide of students going abroad.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, and is a big debate of the brain drain and brain regain, whichever way you want to look at it. I do not think probably that NEC will be able to stop that completely, maybe reduce to an extent. But I believe people coming to at least Canada, I can say there are not education as a core motive. There are lifestyle, there are opportunities, there are moving to the Western world are the underlying objectives for moving and this migration that is happening. And of course, education is one channel by which you can go through instead of, doing it a direct PR or a green card or whatever. You go there, study, and then you probably settle down. So the motive is not core education, but it is more of moving to the Western world, which we see a craze in a lot of part of India, a lot of parts of in India. So I don't think it's gonna stop. It's certainly gonna reduce to a great extent. At least for those who wants to get a quality education, some of the top school students we have seen moving and preferring to a lot of Indian universities than going abroad, because the new age Indian universities like yours or Kalas and some others are doing some phenomenally good work at a significantly lower cost. So of course that is going to be there, but there are motives, and there are individual aspirations that work towards that direction. So, and looking at the population growth and the boom in India, which is coming over the next 10 years in the higher education, I think the pure number wise, it's going to increase. The percentage wise, it might go down, from a quantitative perspective. About Waterloo coming to India, I don't think we have a plan to have it. It amounts to huge resources, budget allocations, quality of faculty member is the kind of things that we want to do it. I think probably I'm not the right person to comment about it, but probably not next 5 years.
Thank you, Dr. Pavak. So I'll just take the last question. I know it's been a long afternoon. Thank you so much for my panelists for holding it together and the audience. But there are a lot of positive comments about the webinar. I'm not going to read out all of them, but I think one of the most impressive debated topic is the topic of mother tongue. And there is this lady who has come up with a very interesting thought, Aisha Masood. She says, how will the mother tongue formula work? What about intercaste, interreligion marriages? What will be the mother tongue for that student? So, and is it mandatory? And she also talks about special need children. The NEP doesn't talk about much about that. So I will open this up to anybody. This is our last question. So anybody, final comments on mother tongue issue, the 3-language formula that has been envisioned in the NEP. So please, if anybody would like to take this up, I will be happy to give it. Samir, if you would like to start with you.
Sure. Sure. I think, wherever possible is the key word they're saying, wherever possible, that mother tongue can be the language of instruction. So my understanding of it is that it is more directional and optional, and schools will make a choice based on the socioeconomic group they're dealing with. So I think it's an individual choice left to schools. A school like ours deals with a highly mobile population, which is coming in and out of the country, not just within the state. So I don't think it's possible for us. And it's not fair to, kind of impose a language formula in a democratic society. I think that's something. However, when it comes to government schools, I think it could be a good idea to look at it. But again, if I go back to schools like Kendra Vidyalaya or army schools, I don't think it's fair. If I'm posted in Karnataka today, tomorrow I may be in Tamil Nadu, and 2 years later I'll be in Shillong. Think of those children. How many languages in the term of 10 years of schooling they have to go through, and what would end up becoming their language of instruction. So I think so that's where the English becomes a common this thing. Second thing, what you talked about is intercaste marriages, interreligious marriages, and I think it's a choice of a family. I mean, when I got married, my wife wanted to acquire my surname, but she wanted to retain her name also. So, which is, I think, I was perfectly okay with her to just retain her father's surname. So these are individual choices we all have to make. Which one would be, if I go by the gender stereotype, then mother's tongue would be the mother's tongue. So, I think leaving that aside, I think it's an individual family choice. The 3-language formula, I'm still trying to understand. I've not understood it very deeply. If I look at it, if I'm a section of a highly mobile parent who's in a bank officer or army, what are the choices for me, right? I'm going to be I can be in my 10-year span, I can be in 5 different states over a period of 10 years of my school education. So probably English would be my first language, language of instruction. What is my second choice? It could be Hindi. I think there is a little agenda there to push Sanskrit as a main language. There are multiple reasons for that. So I see that as coming in competition with Hindi, but where are the Sanskrit teachers in India? I don't know where will we get so many teachers, qualified teachers to teach Sanskrit also. So this is my take. I think it's a family choice. It's an individual choice. Schools should not be convinced. And it's testing wherever possible. So I'm holding on to the hope to that word of wherever possible. Over to Kala. Kala wants to say something.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just I think to some extent, there's a couple of angles to that. So one is, yes, the understanding that multiple languages gives you a certain cognitive ability. And as you grow, like I'm here, I speak 5 languages. And that's just come from moving around different parts of India. And some I've taken an interest to learn as a young child. So it's really, I think the fear of one is, are we losing that ability to trade multiple languages? The overemphasis on English sometimes. So if you actually look at many children right from when they're born, the parents are actually getting them to learn English because that becomes an entry requirement into some of the elite schools. So right at pre-primary KG or LKG, they need to speak English. So personally, as a parent, until my child was 4 years old, we didn't teach her a word of English. So she never spoke English. So we insisted on talking on our mother tongue. I said, anyway, she's going to pick up English when she gets to school. So it's fine. But the mother tongue might lose out over time. And we insisted on some of those things. So it's really, it's a choice of the family. eventually on what they want for the child. So some of this gets difficult to impose. While I think the appetite for languages should be built in a very different sort of way. So I think, how do you connect with local cultures? How do you make conversations? For instance, is a child able to talk to the grandparent who does not know English? And hence, why is that becoming a very socially important aspect? And I think some of those nuances and how to implement it. So by just thrusting a curriculum and a book, you don't get it. I grew up in Chennai, and I learned in Hindi in school. I learned Tamil off a television. Every evening, somebody from TV at 6 to 6:30 would teach Tamil. So that's how I learned. And I learned Malayalam when I used to go on summer vacation to Kerala. And with little books there. So it comes out of, because I wanted to communicate with my cousins, because I wanted to communicate. So you need to kind of, I think, develop that with children, which I think textbooks and mandating may not, but the advantage of languages is something the NEP is trying to push, saying that, but it should be done without a political motive, with the whole central versus state agenda, and forcibly not put on this. And hence that's the nuances of it implementation.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Yeah, Mr. Mathew.
Ankur, I feel slightly differently on the whole mother tongue language kind of thing. Language is an emotional thing. Language is what do you express through your emotions? I mean, what language, what's your emotional language? Is it your mother tongue? Is it some of the language that you're situated in and you can express it through that? What is it that you're very comfortable expressing? There are two things that we need to be looking at here. One is the medium of instruction, and the other one is the language of expression. So what is your medium of instruction? You want to be insisting it has to be English only, then there's an issue, because English is a second language, not a mother tongue. It's somebody else's language and he needs to pick it up. It's not difficult to do that, but then there is a process of actually learning a new language, because emotionally the child is connected with his mother tongue, his mother language, or the language that is comfortable expressing himself. So there's an emotion quotient to it. And we all know as educators that emotionally connected learning is learning that stays with you, and that's where you actually try and understand, analyze, and take the knowledge in and interpret that. So if that is the case, then what I was actually making a case on the linguistic bias when I was talking about the inclusive education is just that. The linguistic bias need to be removed, in the sense that the first 5 years of the emotional language quotient, where the child learns quite a lot, you need to be really quite flexible on that. And the flexibility simply means, I mean, the two people of two different countries and languages get married, and all those kind of complexities you have. But then the child has got his own emotional language that he's rooted in, and he's communicating easily, whether with grandparents or with neighbors, with anybody and everybody. So if that is the one that the teacher can take, and the curriculum actually develops a kind of a learning module that actually gives them the flexibility to turn that in. See, like English language at some point in time is going to be necessary, because the universal language is that, and universally you need to understand quite a lot more of complex concepts which cannot be actually delivered through your mother tongue perhaps. And if that is the case, then you are at some point transiting into English language. So this transition needs to take place, but the beginning of the understanding of reading and the skills of reading, skills of analyzing, skills of expressing, skills of understanding, all of these things should be slightly flexible. So the teacher needs to be providing opportunities for students to be expressing and learning in their own way, and trying to bridge the gap at some point in future. I mean, that's very idealistic way of actually talking. It's a multimodal learning is what I would put it as, and I don't know if that's possible unless it's very well trained by the teacher or the people who are actually doing it. There needs to be some resources that can actually do that, and those resource building is so important. Whether it is, it's not taking one language only kind of a thing. It's a multiple cuisine given there, and children are actually picking up and learning whichever suits them and they can connect with. And this is what I feel about it. the mother language.
Thank you.
Okay, Ankur, I have a point here.
Yeah, please,
Um,
Ms. Bose.
You know, I think this language issue is a reflection of the hypocrisy that exists in our social system. All those guys who talk about, you know, mother tongue has to be promoted and learning is best in the mother tongue. Of course, comfort level with the mother tongue is very, very high, but until all the ministers' children and grandchildren go to a vernacular school, and until government school teachers' children go to a government school, we'll only be talking about it, and it'll always be a point of debate. And this is what I say is the gap between theory and practice, because the lower denominators in society, the marginalized, have realized that English education, English is the only way that they will get into the upper echelons of society. And we cannot take that away, that choice away from them. And my advice to the government system is, first get your act ready. Teach Kannada, Bengali, Hindi, medium schools, teach whatever it is, teach well. And if English is a language, teach it well, so that until you lift the quality of delivery and education, language will be always a point of debate and a political issue.
I think that is absolutely true. We have been talking about going the Russia way and the China way and learning in our own language and creating our own, you know, identity as Indians. But I don't know how much that is possible for a country that is still developing, and we are far away from Europe or Russia or Finland or those sort of countries. So I think that's a yeah.
Just one
Anubhooti,
second. India, you know, I was talking to somebody within the office about this, and they said, you know what, Japan and China are not as diverse societies as India is. So, you know, while we may say that, oh, well, they're learning in their mother tongue, Germany, everybody learns in German, so on and so forth, they're not diverse societies. They're not, you know, homogeneous. They're not diverse societies, and we're not a homogeneous society. So that needs to be factored in.
Every 100 kilometers, our language changes, our food changes, our dress changes. And another aspect of that language aspect, particularly in schools, is 40-45% of population which is teaching in schools, even in early years, doesn't speak the language of the state. They are mobile. They're traveling all over. How do you address that issue if you make it as a compulsory language of instruction? What do you do with those teachers who don't know that language of instruction? I think it's leave to the context, leave it to the choice of the institution. And as Ms. Bose said, do it well, whatever you choose to do. Just do it well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, my panelists and my audience. I love to keep on talking, but it's been a long day for us, and it's 2 hours, over and above 2 hours. So I would like to call it a close. We can go on and on, but probably for some other time. Thank you so much on behalf of OP Jindal Global University. My sincere gratitude to all of you for taking time out, for extending the time by almost an hour and holding it out for us. Audience, thank you so much for your continuous support and being here with us. I think we had a fantastic discussion and we had some really good points made, and I think we are more informed about NEP now than we were at 4 p.m. India time, and which will be Pavak early morning, 5:30 in Canada. But I hope it was worth it, Pavak, for you.
Absolutely.
And so any concluding remarks? That is it from me. Thank you. I will be happy to take some comment. Yeah, Pavak, you were saying something.
No, thank you very much. I think this has been very enlightening discussion and looking at education policy from all aspects, you know, from a high school educator coming from a very elite school to someone who's teaching at a grassroots level, to a fellow neighbor from me who's extremely bullish on India, to some of the finest private universities and some of very experienced teachers. So I think we covered a very well-rounded. That is what any NEC wants, right? Every human being to be knowing all sides of a particular story. And we did a very enriching discussion here. So I am so much thankful for you, Ankur, to inviting me and all of us. Thank you very much. It has been great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.